Okay. Welcome everyone. Is this working? Yeah. Welcome everyone. Ramadan Mubarak for those who are observing, and thank you for coming despite it's the first day of Ramadan here in Lebanon, or because it's the first day of Ramadan and you want to kill some time. But in any way, thank you for coming to this event titled The History of Arab Travelers. Our, of course, distinguished speaker today, or panelist, the only panelist, is Tim Mackintosh-Smith, who is currently a Library of Arabic Literature Fellow at the New York University, Abu Dhabi. I will introduce him shortly, but first I want to say that this event is sponsored and organized by the Sheikh Zayed Chair for Arabic and Islamic Studies. I'm Bilal Orfali, the Sheikh Zayed Chair. It's also organized by the ALFRED HOWELL Chair in History, Dr. Nadia Sheikh, and we, of course, welcome her again to where she truly belongs, to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. She was the Dean of the faculty for some time, and we also where Arts and Sciences started and where it is now, thanks to her efforts, and I'm pretty sure that she'll do the same with the history studies here at AUB. She'll take it to a completely new level. And already in her list of events for this semester is at least 5 or 6 events. Also, this event is sponsored by the AGIA Literary Salon. AGIA is the Arab-German Young Academy. So our distinguished panelist is Tim Mackintosh-Smith, who needs no introduction to this audience and to AUB. He is a writer, a translator, a lecturer, a British traveler, and an Arabist historian, a man of many hats. He has lived in Yemen for over 30 years, situated in one of the oldest centers of civilization in the world. He is an expert in Arab culture and has a deep interest in the history of Arab travelers, reflected in several important books, translations, and documentaries. He is praised for possessing, and here I quote, all the assets a traveler writer needs: erudition, rather subversive good humor, and a descriptive eye capable of sketching complex detail in a few telling lines. Please join me in welcoming Tim Mackintosh-Smith to AUB.
Shukran.
So we'll be both asking you questions. It's a conversation. And our first topic is about your path, your trajectory as a scholar, but also as a traveler and as a writer. And tell me more about beginnings, right, al-bidayat, and how you transitioned from scholarship to study music and also classics. You studied classics, Latin and Greek at Oxford University. How did you transition to discovering and later immersing yourself in Arabic literature?
Well, let me say first of all, let me say first of all, thank you very, very much for bringing me here. If people know me for anything, people tend to know me for following Ibn Battuta, and I have never followed him to Lebanon. It's my first visit. It seems like a terrible confession to make. And I knew, even as the plane was flying in over this sort of gleaming coastline, that I would like it. And I can see why you all love it. And so thank you so much for bringing me here.
Welcome.
Bilal, Nadia, your respective chairs, and yes, happy Ramadan, everyone. Whether you're celebrating it or not, I think, I hope it brings some kind of sakina, some kind of something to quieten this world which is so beset by evil at the moment and problems. So let's hope that will spread across everyone, whether you're celebrating and fasting or not. And Yes, all right, to turn to your question, how did I get into Arabic? Well, I like to remember when I was very little, I was ferreting through a kind of bureau of my father's, and I found this little red lump, which was a bit like a sort of red fuss, like a sort of ringstone, a bit heavy. And I said to my father, "Oh, Dad, what's this?" And he said, "It's the blood of an Arabian dragon." And to cut a long story short, my grandfather used to make violins as a hobby, and it was a piece of dragon's blood, which you may know comes from the dragon's blood tree, which grows in Socotra. But that's what my father said. It's the blood of an Arabian dragon.
We don't know what that is. Can you explain what this is?
Oh, all right.
It's these trees that...
It's these trees, these amazing trees that look like umbrellas that have been blown inside out. And if you kind of go to them in certain seasons, they exude this red samr, this resin or gum, which is called dragon's blood, which is used to make the varnish of violins. But anyway, I knew nothing of this when I was little, but the idea of an Arabian dragon, I think, stayed in my mind. That's my kind of foundation myth, my personal foundation myth. So anyway, on I went. Family friend was quite a distinguished Egyptologist called Leslie Grinsell, and I used to go and study as a teenager. We went through Gardner's Egyptian grammar, which you know, I learned. I used to be able to write those lovely little hieroglyphs, completely forgotten now. But I actually went to university to study Egyptology.
Oh.
The music has always been a side thing, but I kind of thought Egyptology, a bit of a cul-de-sac, you know, what do you do with it? So I chickened out and studied classics, and did that exam that they do at Oxford called Honours Moderations in Literae Humaniores, which was kind of supposedly, I think it was the most difficult exam in the world. And you had to read all of Virgil, all of Homer, all of Ovid, all of Horace, all these people. And I just kind of got fed up with the cramming and thought, no, there must be something more to life, and I want to do something where I can do exciting new things. And so I went back to these really childhood dreams of Arabia, and changed to Arabic. So that's really how I got into Arabic.
And how did you get into travel also? Writing or traveling?
Yeah, well, traveling...
Because also at the time, right, most of the people who did Arabic, they were bookish and they didn't even travel to the region.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know the way we used to study Arabic, certainly in Britain. A lot of Arabists did start off in the classics, and you'd sit there and you would learn the grammar and just sort of sit there and cope with the difficult texts. And we never really spoke it. So I said to Alan Jones, who was my main teacher, he became professor of Arabic at Oxford afterwards. He said, I said, Mr. Jones, I want to go off to Yemen. I'd seen pictures of Yemen when I was small and become sort of entranced with the place. And he sort of looked at me and said, Yemen? Why do you want to go to Yemen? Implying, can't you go somewhere useful, like, Cairo or Beirut or the Bourguiba Institute in Tunis or somewhere like that. And he said, oh, you'll come back speaking some dialect and having forgotten all your fusha. But that's really how I got into traveling in this part of the world. And I went to Yemen, and actually I liked it, and I just sort of stayed there. actually for nearer 40 years.
Wow.
Including through the worst years of this sadly ongoing war. So, yeah, that's my connection with Yemen.
Thank you.
And travel. I feel I should ad-lib. Yes, all right. Nadia.
Your rich career combines various fields in an era where researchers tend to specialize. You present a, I wouldn't say only successful, an incredible model with a career that integrates travel, fieldwork, research, academia, media, writing. How do your works complement and integrate with each other? How did your contributions to documentaries on BBC, for example, contribute to your writing and translation of books, or vice versa?
Yeah, good question, because you know really books are words and TV series are obviously pictures, but they actually fed into each other very, very well. I can think of one particular example. I did a series for the BBC on Ibn Battuta, and if you know his book, he's got a very important passage when he's in the Maldives, where he gives the sort of the story of the origin of Islam in the Maldives, which is, to cut it very short, a sort of horrible demon would come from the sea every month and would demand a virgin girl to be sacrificed, and upturns a young Muslim man from, we don't know, but he was called al-Berberi, so he might have been North African, he might have been from Berbera in Somalia or somewhere, and says, I will go in place of the girl, and goes down to the sea and recites the Quran, and the demon comes from the sea, hears the Quran and runs away. And they all say, oh, this is amazing, what's this Quran, what's this religion, and they become Muslim. So Ibn Battuta tells this lovely story, but there's a postscript, and he says, one night I was sitting in my house when I heard a takbir and a tahleel and the banging of pots, and I rushed down to the street and said, what's going on? And they said, oh, it's the demon. He still comes every month, but then he runs away because he knows we're Muslim. And you think, yes, and then Ibn Battuta says, and I looked to the sea, وَرَأَيْتُ كَأَنَّهُ أو شيئا كَأَنَّهُ سَفِينَةٌ مَلِيئَةٌ بِالْقَنَادِيلِ. I saw this thing like a ship covered in lamps. And it's such a kind of frightening moment, because it's where an obvious, what you'd think is an obvious fairy story, actually becomes real. And when I spent 2 or 3 months in the Maldives and did some research into this, and they said, oh yes, we call it the Kandumati Elon, and it still comes. And, you know, they said that, but could I find anyone who had actually seen it? Yes, I did. And we found him when we were doing the TV program. And we interviewed him. And he told this absolutely hair-raising story of being out on the ocean, fishing, and suddenly this ship covered in lamps and covered in people appears, and it keeps going behind their sail, and it kind of goes there, and then it's suddenly back again, and it was a terrifying story. And we had all of this on videotape. And we had a Maldivian Divehi translator. So afterwards I was able to use that in my book. We didn't actually use the interview. It didn't work on TV because there was nothing visual. You can't talk about this Safina Mali'a bil Qanadil and not actually show it, this ship covered in lamps. but I plundered this for what I eventually wrote about the Maldives. And so that's just one instance where doing TV helped me. It also helped, for example, going and Ibn Battuta interviewed people who were obviously sadhus, Shaivite sadhus, these ascetic Hindu worshippers in Khajuraho, and we went and found one of these to film. He was sort of the last one left. And Ibn Battuta's point is that the Muslim ascetics, we talked about this last night, would come and would study with these sadhus and learn their ascetic practices. So, we went and met the guy. I can't say we interviewed him. He was as high as a kite. He was smoking substances, but actually seeing him and then coming to translate what Ibn Battuta writes about similar people 650 years ago, that helped me with my translation. So books and TV kind of feed into each other.
Beautiful. So my question, Tim, 40 years, right? 4 decades of living in this cradle of civilization. 40 years living in such a very rich place. From a youth at Oxford to now 40 years after living in Yemen. What changed in Tim Mackintosh-Smith as a historian, but also as a person? And how did also Yemen change in these 40 years? How did the place change? How did you change? And your relation to the place as well?
Yeah, all right. Well, how did I change? Well, I mean, I suppose I could say that really Yemen made me. And the exposure to Arabic, and of course, one learns, when I speak Arabic, I speak San'ani Arabic, and try as I might to be very fasih and classical, I will always slip into San'ani. And so, in effect, it made my Arabic. Also, as some of you may know, many of the Yemenis have a habit. Some of you might say a bad habit, which is chewing a leaf called qat, gat. We call it in Sana'a. In San'ani, it's actually called mismar al-jahr. In other words, al-jahr is what you sit on. So it nails you to your seat. And so for years, when I'm in Yemen, not outside, I must say, I am a partaker of this, and it made me sit and talk with people when I was chewing qat with other people, but when I was chewing qat alone, it made me read lots and lots. All these things like, were we talking about nafh-tib? We were talking about al-Makari, I think. And nafh-tib, min ghusn al-Andalus al-Ratib, is a big book, it's like that. But if you chew qat and you're sitting there, you will read it from cover to cover. It really helps you concentrate. And
good advice to PhD students.
Well, yeah. I mean, what Imam Yahya himself, the former Imam of Yemen, somebody said, "Oh, what does it do to you?" And he said, "Well, للعيون جلاء, وللضعف ذهاب, وللثغور صباغ, زمردي يذاب." So, how can you translate that? I don't know.
You're the translator.
It gives eyes a clarity, and it takes away your tiredness, it stains your lips with a melting emerald. It sounds rather disgusting,
So
doesn't
Yemen
it?
made you. Yemen made you, right? Yeah. But how did Yemen also change in these 40 years?
Well, obviously it's changed a lot, and it's changed a huge amount recently. I suppose it didn't change so much for a lot of the time. It's one of the results of having a sort of long-serving ruler in the person of Ali Abdullah Saleh. And it's actually quite sort of rooted in itself, Yemen. Well, to give you an example, my house that I've lived in a lot of the time I've been there, it's on the northern end of the ruin mound of Qasr Ramdan, or Rumdan it really should be, which is the pre-Islamic palace. So, you know, think back to Sheba, the kingdom of Saba, Sheba, and it was the palace of that time. And its collapsed remains are underneath my house. And also in the same spot was the palace of the Abbasid governor. So it's got a lot of history which it's kind of rooted in. Yeah, obviously events more recently have been, have changed it at least superficially. I mean, I think there are sort of, you know, things which are constant. There's that famous hadith of the Prophet where he says, what is it? Atakum ahlul Yemen, innahum alyanu quluban wa araku af'ida, al-iman yamanin wal hikmah yamaniya. The Yemenis have the softest, kindest hearts of all. Iman, faith is Yemeni and wisdom is Yemeni. And it's kind of, you know, if you know it, and you know, I know some of you do. There's something very sort of soft-hearted and yeah, and faithful in the best sense, which all this kind of noise and nastiness sometimes of the present, I don't think it will wipe it out.
So we're entering now the second group of questions, topic which is travel writing. And my question to you is that travel literature dominates your body of work, oeuvre, right? And to what extent do you find in the books of Arab travelers material suitable for studying other literary genres, Arabic literary genres, such as poetry, biographies, and historical events? So the question is about narrative and fiction somehow, or historical reality, because we also know that some of these, where the question comes from, is that some of these travelogues were not written as travelogues, right? Like Sirafi, for example, as a merchant, or Ibn Fadlan. We don't even know why he wrote these notes, right? So they don't usually adhere to certain paradigms that we know in history, for example, or literature, right? So how do you describe this body of literature and how it can be used in the study of Arabic literature today?
Well, you know, I think the word rihla, it's obviously talking about motion or movement. Thank you. And you know, quite often people are mentioned as the scholar al-alim al-rahala, the great traveller. And it just means that he has been to a lot of places. Now, what he will have done with going to those places is a different matter. And the idea of a rihla covers a lot of things. And it could be, you know, there's one called, it's by al-Fihri, Ibn Rashid al-Fihri. And that's a rihla, and you think, oh, a travel book, he's going to be talking about interesting places. And in fact, it's really a collection of ahadith, of hadiths, sayings and doings of the Prophet that he picked up. You get the Rihla of Al-Abdari, for example, who was a Moroccan early 14th century. He came from a place called Haha, which always sticks in my memory. And I don't know whether it was because he came from a place with a name like that, but he was kind of combative. And he really seemed to travel to demolish people. And he said, oh, I went to Egypt, and the people of Cairo, they're terrible, and the scholars there are awful. And then I went to Alexandria, and they're even worse, kind of thing. So that was a sort of catalogue of criticism. Ibn Battuta is, in a sense, very unusual. And his travel book is quite what we think of as travel books. It's going to places, talking about them, but also, of course, talking a lot about the people. And for that reason, people did not think he was serious at the time. They thought he was a bit unscholarly. So really what I'm trying to say is that the word rihla, or kitab rihla, it covers so many things. And even within one book, I'm working at the moment on it's really the autobiography of Ibn Khaldun, and he calls it a ta'rif Ibn Khaldun, وَرِحْلَتُهُ غَرْبًا وَشَرْقًا. So it's a kind of exposition, biography of Ibn Khaldun and his travels west and east. And this book, it covers everything and anything. I mean, you do get him going to places, but more of it is about meetings with people, and it also functions as a scrapbook. So he's got his passport from the Sultan of Granada. The text of that is there. And this wonderful correspondence with Lisan ad-Din Ibn al-Khatib, with the greatest exponent of saj'a, of rhyming rhythmic prose in his time. And so you get these long, long letters, which when I first started translating them, I thought, oh my God, how do you cope with this? It's so difficult and so rich and allusive and elusive, well, and even elusive. But now I realize it's such an important part of this book, which doubles as a sira dhatiya, an autobiography, and a rihla, and a travel book. So, you know, when you're talking about Arabic travel books, really forget genre. It's rihla is a very kind of, it's a portmanteau word.
Interesting, very interesting, Nadia.
So let's go back a little bit to Ibn Battuta, because you've given him a lot of attention in your career. Why Ibn Battuta again? You've alluded a little bit to it, so maybe you can explain a little bit more why the focus on Ibn Battuta, and how did his journey inspire you both personally and professionally?
Yeah, Ibn Battuta I sort of think of as, I think of rather as my Sheikh, and I'm sort of a bit like his murid. And you know, he was a Sheikh almost in the Sufi sense, and I'm sort of a bit like his disciple. He was very interested in the spiritual side of life, and he went to a lot of he visited a lot of holy people and shrines to people who had been who were dead. So yeah, we've got a sort of quite a close relationship. But your question was what he means to me, and really how I developed and what, yes.
Program of writing.
Well, I wrote my first book about Yemen, and it was partly in response to people who said things like, I remember in the Daily Telegraph, the paper in the UK, there was a report that said you could buy a bazooka in the souk in Sana'a, and it sort of implied you could try it out. You know, there are a lot of these fairy stories about Yemen. I mean, so those of us who've been there, you might remember, you could actually by a bazooka in the place called the Tal up in the north, and but not in Sana'a. And so I wanted to sort of deal with these misconceptions and also give another side to Arabia. You know, if you think of it as all deserts and camels and oil and so on, the Yemen is very different. So I tried in that first book to kind of, if you like, explain Yemen to outsiders. And then really what I'm doing with Ibn Battuta, or what I did, was to kind of explain the wider world. He is the perfect vehicle. He traveled at such an important time when the Islamic world as it is now was actually being formed. And we all think of the al-Futuhat al-Islamiyya, or the original formation in the first century of Islam, which was obviously incredibly important. But there was another great wave in Ibn Battuta's time, the 13th, 14th centuries, when Muslim merchants, scholars, travelers were going out, particularly around the Indian Ocean and across the Sahara down into sub-Saharan Africa, and really forming this great arc of culture and language. And Ibn Battuta was sort of surfing the arc, if that makes sense. And I realized that he was actually a very good vehicle for talking about the wider Arab Islamic world. And well, the other thing is, when you travel with as I did, with a traveling companion who has been dead for 650 years, and you were looking at what he was looking at and trying to find the exact things that the very cave that he visited and the very hole that he lived in Delhi when he fell out with the Sultan, and he ended up sort of staying in this hole in the ground, and I think I found it. And when you're doing this so intensely, in a sense, the time falls away. It sounds a bit whimsical, but if you think of time as the sort of fourth dimension, traveling with an old, defunct, dead traveling companion, in effect takes the dimension of time away, and you begin to see the sort of patterns and the shapes that go across time.
You are very well known for appreciating the diversity of Arab cultures and their differences, and for emphasizing the importance, of course, of the Arabic language. What is the source of your appreciation for this Arab uniqueness? Can we say that you inherited it from Arab travelers, Tuta, from others? Something about your connection with the language.
Yeah, the language. I mean, it really is the most important thing for me, because I'm not actually sure that you can talk about Arab uniqueness as such. I mean, I think. As a historian of sorts, among other things, you can't look at everyone as being the same. Obviously, different circumstances, different periods, and so on. But I think you can make comparisons between Arabs and different peoples at different times. I've tried to do this in my history, and I've mentioned really that the formation of being Arab was partly in contradistinction to being non-Arab. So you get your Arab and your Ajam. And, you know, we do have other examples of peoples forming like this, or identities coalescing. I mean, you get the Arya and the, whatever they're called, the Mleccha, I think, in India. And so, yeah, I don't think the process is unique. I think, you know, in some senses, there's something similar between the formation of what you could call the Arab Empire and, it sounds a bit weird, the British Empire as well, in the sense that both were people from small islands. Well, actually, no, Al Jazeera Al Arabiya, it's not small, but the population was small, and it's a bit out on a limb. And you know, Britain is certainly out on a limb. It's the end of Europe, and yet both of us managed to have quite a wide effect. I think what is unique about Arabs is indeed, as you said, it's their language. And of course, it's not unique as a language because there are other related languages. But
the consciousness about the language.
The consciousness, the self-consciousness, and the power of it. And I think there's something almost, I don't know, I don't want to be accused of using sort of gendering in the wrong way or something, but there's almost something a bit masculine about Arabic, the way that it sort of inserts itself into different so, you know, like look at Swahili and look at, you know, Malay and other things where Arabic has sort of inserted itself and it's projected itself. It is so strong and so irresistible, if you like. Maybe the gender thing is the wrong metaphor to use, but that's how I see it personally a bit. But I certainly do think that Arabic language is the secret to it all, and you know, it's very obvious. Look at the Quran was the first Arabic book, and the secret of writing coming to Mecca. There's a verse, I forget who by, but it's just kind of around the beginning of Islam or just a bit before, and it says, it's addressing the Meccans, and it says, oh, now you've got your own writing, so you can do without the writing of the Persians and the Byzantines and the Musnad of the old South Arabian empires, and that is all defunct because you have your own writing. And it's really, it was marking the way that Arabs sort of joined this international club of cultures and empires. And then, you know, fast forwarding ahead to the 19th century, if it had not been for Arabic and the interest in Arabic language and literature, would there have been a nahda, an awakening, an Arab awakening? I don't know. Do you think there would? It was, a lot of it was sort of predicated on language and the need to revive the language and use it to get out there and project themselves.
So Tim, I'll continue with this theme of Arab context. In your latest book, 3,000 Year History of Peoples, Tribes and Empires, you chronicle a 3,000 year history of Arabs covering peoples, tribes and rulers. There are many attempts before that, right? I can think of Hitti, for example, Tarikh al-Arab, History of Arab People as well, Hurani, many others, right? What sets this history apart from others previously written in the subject, right? What is your take to this? We were discussing this yesterday, and I think you corrected some misconception that I had about the book, right? So I'll let you talk
I
about
don't think you
this
did,
perspective.
but I don't remember you had a misconception. But maybe I sort of stressed things that you hadn't.
No, the misconception
what
that I
was the
had,
misconception?
to me, the book was fascinating in how you talk about urbanism versus the countryside, the clash between the two, the role of the Arabic language, etc. But I also found it unfair to the Ottomans, right? And,
all right, yes.
but then you clarified this to me by saying, for example, well, it's a history from the side of Yemen, from the perspective of Yemen. Me living in Yemen, the Ottomans were not important. Right?
Well, they were. I mean, they did occupy. No, that was a very good point. The Ottomans did, of course, occupy Yemen for 2 periods, quite long periods. But no, I think it's quite easy to sit in this part of the world and have this sort of wajhat nazar, this point of view from here. And of course, it's very easy to sit in a library in the West somewhere, and in Oxford or wherever, or Harvard, and so yeah, I did have a different perspective, well, first of all, I was asked to write a history of Arabs, so. A lot of histories of Arabs, or the Arabs, tend to devolve into histories of Islamic culture and other things. So I wanted to keep a tight focus, and that's partly why the poor old Ottomans didn't get such a look in. Also, I mean, somebody like Eugene Rogan, he wrote an excellent history it's called A History of the Arabs, I think. And it starts in 1500, but it's really the way that Arabs and Ottomans, if I remember, I read it a long time ago.
It's history of the Ottomans.
Yeah, so it in a sense, I felt that had been a bit covered, and I didn't want to tread on anyone's feet. So that was, that's dealing with the Ottomans. But what makes mine different? Well, really, I did a sum. I did some adding and subtracting, and apparently the earliest mention of Arabs historically it's in an Assyrian inscription. It's quite famous, which dates to 853 BC. Now, a lot of histories of Arabs. They say sort of, the Arabs came onto the world stage with Islam, and well, in a sense they did. They came out of Arabia with that, but they had a long history before, and by doing the sums, you realize that Islam is exactly in the middle. So we've had 1400 plus years since the time of the Prophet, but we also had 1400 years before. About which we know a lot less, and we can't know, we can never know as much, but we still do know quite a lot. So I tried to give that first 1400 years more of its due. In fact, Hitti, I still think Hitti's history is excellent. Well, Hitti and Hurani are both, I'm not trying to supersede them. And Hitti does give quite a bit to pre-Islamic times, but of course, when he wrote his history, we knew a lot less.
Right.
We know a lot more about the corpus of South Arabian inscriptions and the corpus of the North Arabian inscriptions, those amazing Safayetic, etc., graffiti from the desert. So I tried to give more to that first 1400 years. And in doing so, I realized how important they were and how important the South is for the rest of Arab history. And, there's this kind of received wisdom that Yemenis are the original Arabs, which doesn't really fit with the evidence. I mean, you only get Arabs appearing in Yemeni inscriptions about the year 0. Between BC and AD. And they're obviously outsiders, they're obviously coming in. Very quickly, their language takes over. Really, a couple of hundred years before Islam, the old South Arabian languages had stopped being used, as far as we can tell. It's a bit difficult, but they were still used in inscriptions. You know, as you might get a Latin inscription here in AUB, but actually people had begun to speak Arabic. But the idea that somehow Yemenis were the original Arabs, that doesn't really fit with the evidence. But I would turn it on its head and say that a lot of what we think of as being Arab and Islamic today actually comes from the south. And I think we talked about this last night. You know, the idea that when the prophets started calling Allah Ar-Rahman, you know, the people were not happy in Mecca with this, and the verse descended saying, call him Allah, call him Ar-Rahman, call him by the most beautiful names. Ar-Rahman was the merciful. It was a name of the monotheistic deity in Yemen, not Jewish, not Christian. So you know, I think we can infer. We can't always say definitely, but you know, the connections of Islam with Christianity and Judaism are obvious, shared prophets, etc. But there's also a lot which comes from the old South. So you know, I've tried to kind of put this forward, and it's not just me having a good idea and wanting to be different. It very much chimes with early Arabic writing historians, and you know, people like al-Mas'udi and the Tabari, and they tend to go back to Adam, as we know, and they tend to stress the importance of the old southern kingdoms. So I'm not really doing anything new. I'm just sort of shifting, looking slightly askance at Arab history from my little corner of Arabia.
Well, I would add that the difference also is that you're a very good storyteller in this book. It's full of stories, and you often say, me sitting in Sana'a hearing that, and you start often with the story, the narrative, and that's I think very different from others.
Yeah, and I mean, I do start. I don't snipe at Hawrani, because I mean, we did cross over in Oxford, and I have huge respect for him. But I did point out that most historians tend to write in the comfort of a library, and there I was sort of. You know, in medias res, in the middle of everything, with missiles and bombs and everything else, and people I knew getting killed. So it was rather you know, a bit like working on Ibn Khaldun now, and there's this wonderful passage where he's talking about writing his famous Muqaddimah, and he says that effectively he got embroiled in all this politics and plots and shenanigans and with sultans and tribes, and in the end he took himself off to Qal'at ibn Salama in present-day Algeria, and he said, when I was there, what was it, something like سالت الشعابيب شعابيب المعاني على الفكر. I think that's what he said. سالت شعابيب المعاني على الفكر, which means شعابيب, شعبوب. What is شعبوب? It's a rain, but it's like kind of floods flowing. Flux, I think, is the word I use. A flux of meanings flowed across my thinking, and you know, the idea of this guy sitting in this tower house and me sitting in my little tower house, and I mean, I'm not comparing myself with what you know, I'm not comparing the outcome of what I did with what he did, but our situation was not dissimilar.
Yeah.
Where you're at the kind of eye of a storm and trying to make sense of what's going on.
Go on a little bit about Ibn Khaldun. You are translating the autobiography. How are you experiencing this work, actually getting close to Ibn Khaldun, and how is it impacting you?
Well, I said that I was kind of a bit like a murid, and Ibn Battuta is my Sheikh. I don't think I will ever have quite the same relationship with Ibn Khaldun, partly because I think he was a bit, he was kind of a bit obstreperous. You know, he comes across as an amazing mind, which obviously he was, but you know, when he goes to Cairo and he's appointed Qadi Qudrat al-Malikiyya, the Maliki Chief Justice, and he sort of says, and I made sure that there wasn't any more of that that facade, that corruption and everything, and you can just see everyone's going, oh, the new broom, sweeping everything clean. Oh, he's so pleased with himself, and actually you get this from his contemporaries, and this is why he actually lost that job 5 times. I mean, he must have been good at it to be reinstated 5 times, but he was actually Maliki Chief Justice of Cairo, of Egypt, 6 times in all. So I don't think I will have a personal. No, I love him because he's such a good writer and he's such a brilliant man. But you know, if I could choose between having dinner with him or with Ibn Battuta, I think I would choose Ibn Battuta. If you could choose between the two of them to give a talk here, choose Ibn Khaldun, obviously, yeah. But I think, so, yeah, it's an interesting experience, and I'll come back to, I thought we might finish with a bit of translation at the end. Actually not from Ibn Khaldun, but you know, I'm up against, as I said, all this correspondence with Ibn al-Khatib, his contemporary, and other people, which is very, very rich. You know, there's a letter embedded in this autobiography where the Sultan of Tunis has given a present of horses and slaves to the Sultan of Granada, and Ibn al-Khatib writes a thank you letter, and it's not just oh, you know, thank you very much for your excellent present. It's 30 pages long, and he describes every single horse in great detail. You know, it's sort of, I don't know, there's the yellow one, which is, I don't know, it's probably would it be a bay roan in English? I'm not sure. And it's, you know, it's taken أشعة الشمس من الأمس ونسج منها حلته, and you know, it's taken the beams of the sun from yesterday and woven a robe, and it you know, it prances chasing down the night, and its tail has been caught by the darkness. And you know, on and on it goes. It's fantastic stuff, but it's hard to get the richness with our brief at the Library of Arabic Literature of making it digestible and relevant to the modern reader. So
my last question, Tim, is about the Library of Arabic Literature, right? Is this project of NYU Abu Dhabi that aims to present Arabic English translations of Arabic classics in adjacent editions, right? You can read the Arabic and the English together. It's a huge project, and you've translated a number of works to this project, including Abdul Latif al-Baghdadi, right? So, Physician at the Nile, or is the title. So, what is the importance of translating these rihla books into English, and to what extent does it, because of course you can't translate all Arabic literature, right? You have to select, right? And you've selected to translate these rihlas, right? And so at the expense of other things that they could have funded, including, for example, poetry, diwans, or anthologies, or other things, right? So to what extent does it contribute, the translations of these rihlas, to the study of civilizations other than Arabic literature? I'm thinking here theoretically, for example, of Patrice Chacron, right, who approaches Islam in looking at other sources, non-Arab sources, or for example, Hoyland, Robert Hoyland, Islam as the others saw it, right? So what's the importance of translating these works in general and to civilizations other than Arabic?
Yeah, well, I would say that, yes, I've got my little sort of corner of doing travel literature for the Library of Arabic Literature, but there are others who do poetry and other things. Well, for example, the maqamat of
Hariri.
Of Al-Hariri, yes, I was going to say Badi' al-Zaman, but it's Al-Hariri, and which has actually become something of a, was it a bestseller?
Yeah.
Yeah, by Michael Cooperson. Sorry, I should give him a puff. James Montgomery translating, the Ma'allaqat of
and Diwan Antara.
And Diwan Antara and so on. So yeah, it is a very wide project, and I mean I think we should translate all of Arabic literature, or all of the good stuff. But then how do you decide what's good? But okay, your question is why am I doing travel literature? Well, it's kind of, I don't think you have to defend it on any grounds, but it does have a great relevance in telling us about other societies.
Ibn Fadlan is an example, right? He is absolutely not important in Arabic literature. It wasn't even a book, right? And found in one unique, not even complete memoir, but then it's the history of the Viking.
Yes, exactly. And James Montgomery translated that in the same volume. I translated Akhbar al-Sin wal-Hind, accounts of China and India. Yeah, part of it is by Abu Zayd al-Sirafi. And, that book, it tells us a lot about what was going on in Tang Dynasty China and, the position of foreigners there. It has Tang Dynasty administrative bureaucratic terms, Chinese terms in transcribed into Arabic. They were a pain to sort out what they meant, but so I had to get help from Zvi. So yeah, they open windows onto other worlds. Look at Ibn Battuta. You might say the Maldives are insignificant in terms of land area, but we wouldn't know nearly as much about their history if we didn't have Ibn Battuta, who actually married into the ruling family and sort of tried to foment a coup. It was one of his less successful moments. But we know a lot about the Maldives from him. We know a lot about the Empire of Mali, and to get that outsider's eye, it's tremendously important. And the people who were traveling at that period, well, a lot of people were traveling, but particularly it was Arabic writers of Arabic. So we get these sort of windows into other cultures and other histories. Well, Ibn Battuta, for heaven's sake, he spent 10 years in Delhi. So we have an outsider's eye on the what's called the Delhi Sultanate, a kind of, if you like, a predecessor of the Mughals, and it's absolutely mind-blowing what he tells us. so there's all of that. And you mentioned that I translated Abdul Latif al-Baghdadi, his book on Egypt, which he wrote in about 1200. And he was, I was going to say a proto-Egyptologist. No, he was a sort of fully formed Egyptologist. There's a remarkable passage where he's talking about the Sphinx, you know, Abul Hol. And he talks about it before that naughty man who was called appropriate to remember his name on the first day of Ramadan. He was called Sa'im ad-Dahr. But he was some kind of zealot who went and knocked the nose off the Sphinx after Abdul Latif was there. And Abdul Latif describes the Sphinx's face. As a physician and an anatomist, and the description is beautiful. You know, a smile plays upon the lips and brings this huge and stony face to life. And it does not matter that the proportions are much greater than anything we know in real life, because he has captured the spirit of the living face. And we don't get that again really until the time of Napoleon. And a lot of people tend to think, oh, you know, modern Egyptology was founded by les savants, the scholars who went with Napoleon. But you know, there's a passage in I think it's Vivant de Nom, who was an artist and one of that team with Napoleon, which is kind of, it's almost a translation from Abdul Latif. And there he is appreciating the beauties and the anatomical correctness of pharaonic sculpture. So, you know, these books, they really open windows onto unexpected worlds. And they're seen, because they are seen by outsiders, they are removed from local prejudices and politics.
So the last question for us before we open the floor for questions. It's about translation. More specifically, translating works from one language to the other, from one context to another. It presents numerous challenges. What problems do you face in translation, and how do you overcome them?
Well, I don't know who somebody said, oh, if you try to translate poetry, it's like putting a butterfly in a crucible. And you know, lots of people have said, well, I think Al-Jahed said something to the effect of poetry is what you can't translate. It's impossible to translate. So, you know, I'm off to a pretty rocky start. And then with the Library of Arabic Literature guidelines about making things accessible, that kind of adds another layer. It's really dealing with the richness, and somehow the sort of poetry that I tend to translate, which was old-fashioned in the 8th Islamic century, the 14th century. It's not terribly original. It's formulaic. It can be very beautiful of its sort. But because it is somewhat formulaic, that makes it a bit easier to translate, maybe. Ibn al-Khatib, who I've been going on about a lot, he must haunt me. He's completely crazy in his Sajj, and he says things like when he's writing a personal letter to Ibn Khaldun, he says, oh, forgive me, the horses of my imagination have bolted and have gone out of the racetrack, and you know, effectively he admits to talking nonsense, and so getting that across. But it's always an interesting challenge, and I wondered if I could try. I'm particularly fond of trying to translate Sajj, this rhyming rhythmical prose, which you honestly can't do rhymed and rhythmical on a large scale. But maybe I should give you a snippet.
You have an example.
I've
right?
got an example.
Please.
Would you like to read the original? Or
I'll
shall
try.
I? I mean, I don't mind. We could read it together.
No, do you want to try? What do you prefer?
Well, I'm sure you'd read it better.
I'll try.
It's a storm. All right, let me
And
introduce
you've written this?
No, this is
Okay.
This is Al-Makari, who is famous for writing.
Okay.
Let me explain this. It's Al-Makari who was famous for writing this great compendium of memories of Al-Andalus, of Islamic Spain. And in the beginning, in the introduction, he finds himself on a ship traveling to Egypt, and the ship gets into a storm. So this is you can read it stormily, Bilal, if you...
وأيسنا من الحياة لصوت تلك العواصف والمياه فلا حي الله ذلك الهول المزعج ولا بياه والموج يصفق لسماع أصوات الرياح فيطرب بل ويضطرب فكأنه من كأس الجنون يشرب أو شرب فيبتعد ويقترب وفرقه تلتطم وتصفق وتختلف ولا تكاد تتفق فتخال الجو يأخذ بنواصيها وتجذبها أيديه من قواصيها حتى كاد سطح الأرض يكشف من خلالها وعنان السحب يخطف في استقلالها وقد أشرفت النفوس على التلف من خوفها واعتلالها وآذنت الأحوال بعد انتظامها باختلالها وساءت الظنون وتراءت في صورها المنون والشراع في قراع مع جيوش الأمواج التي أمدت منها الأفواج بالأفواج ونحن قعود كدود على عود.
شكرا يا بلال.
In English.
In English. Would you like to read it in English? So this is oh gosh, getting old. What with the din of storms and waters, we abandoned hope of getting out alive and well. May God give neither life nor succour to that fearful swell. The waves applauded when they heard the voices of the winds and raved and came to blows as if they'd drunk a draught that sent them into frenzy's throes. Now far, now near they rose, waves in squads at odds with one another, clapping and slapping, dashing and clashing with one another, until you'd think the hands of the air had grabbed them by the hair and dragged them from their deepest lair. And you'd all but see the bed of the sea between those waves laid bare, and their crests flying high to wrest the clouds from the sky in their snare, till fear and illness made each soul confront destruction's stare, and all resolve threatened to dissolve in despair. And imagination conjured up the worst that could be feared as death in every shape before our eyes appeared. And the sails barged in pell-mell to brave the armies of the swell that charged us wave on wave, while there we sat, each one of us storm-sick and helpless as a tick upon a stick. So, Hadudin ala oud. And that, as we were saying, I think it's Al-Khalifa Umar, who in the time of the Futuhat, the original Arab conquest, he said to people, don't go and cross the sea, only go where you can go on your camel, because if you go on, people who go on the sea are kadud ala oud, and this is, you know, like worms on sticks, or like a tick on a stick. And this is, you know, translating this, you sometimes feel that you're like a didan ala idan, like worms on sticks. a bit kind of lost.
We have time for some questions from the audience.
Some questions, comments?
Yes. Hello. Hello. Thank you all for the lovely talk. My name is Talal Shami. I'm a media grad from UAE. I really don't need this. Okay, thank you. My question is, sir, who do you think qualifies as a writer or a traveler? I mean, who do you think qualifies as a traveler? Is it the writer who becomes a traveler, or the traveler who actually becomes a writer? How do these two notions speak to each other? This is my first question. And then in the process of you doing all this, extensive and daunting research, do you become one? It's a twofold thing. And then my second question is, on a more aesthetic level or sense, how does this traveler/writer find his own voice and identity? And is this part of the traveling and experience that he actually going through or witnessing or living as he moves from one place to another? And in a more technical, on more practical terms, if we talk the language of today, I mean, someone who's been around so many countries and he writes, does he or she sort of kind of articulates the same kind of qualifications or sort of traits as those from ancient times or past times?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. No, it's kind of making my mind fizz with trying to answer. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, first of all, the relationship between being a traveller and a writer. I think you've got to do both. Yeah, you can't do one and not the other. I mean, it's a really obvious thing to say, but I can illustrate it by saying, for example, when Ibn Battuta's in China, he sees a guy, and it's like one of these scenes in the film where they run to each other and they embrace and kiss and they weep, because it's somebody called Al-Bushri, and he knows him from Morocco. And Ibn Battuta was from Tangier, Al-Bushri was from Sabta, it's just up the road. The thing is, there were lots of people like Ibn Battuta travelling, and like Al-Bushri, and he stayed with Al-Bushri's brother on the edge of the Sahara. It was a very mobile age, but not many people got back and wrote about it. And in fact, he was the only one who did such a huge journey and got back and wrote. So you've really got to do both. And you can't sort of expire somewhere along the road and lose your notebooks, because otherwise it doesn't mean anything. He had to get back to Morocco and then be commissioned by Sultan Abu Ainan, the Marinid Sultan, to write that book. And then you asked about, so yeah, you can't really be one without the, well, of course you can be a traveller or you can be a writer. There was this sort of strange category that I mentioned of people who wrote rihlas, which are not really about travelling. So like Ibn Rushayd, whose rihla is really a collection of ahadith. And it's not very much about travelling. And there are quite a lot of other books like that. Yeah, really, I'm applying a more up-to-date idea of what a travel book is. But you asked about finding the voice.
His or her own voice.
His or her own voice.
In relation to what she's experienced, yes.
Well, I mean, again, I can talk about the past. I can talk about Ibn Battuta, that he tried to find his own voice, and it wasn't very highly thought of. He was thought to be rather sort of savage, naive, yeah. Certainly in a literary sense he was naive. And so they recruited somebody called Ibn Juzay to help him write the Rihla and to turn it into something a lot more literary. And Ibn Juzay, probably it was Ibn Juzay, borrowed from Ibn Jubayr, who was an earlier traveller. Actually, Ibn Jubayr is, why did I forget to mention him before? He's rather remarkable because he writes a very important travel book which is about travelling. And it tells us a lot about the situation in these parts in the time of the Crusades. It tells us about the Norman kingdom of Sicily, the situation in the court, but it's also a book where he finds his literary voice. And it's often that have you read his?
I've read it with my
yeah,
students.
it's absolutely beautiful book. I mean, it's gorgeous. There's always one bit that sticks in my mind. He's becalmed on the Mediterranean, and he says something like, "We were bayna sama'ain." A sama and the bahr. We were bayna sama'ain ala sabikatin min al-lujain. And it kind of goes on like this. It's absolutely beautiful. Oh, there we were on an ingot of silver, as if we were between two skies. So it's a book of great beauty. So there was another question, another part, or have I answered it?
More practical terms in today's sort of sense.
Yeah. Oh, in today's sense. Yeah. I don't know. I think you just do what you think is right. I mean, somebody asked Somerset Maugham, how do you write a novel? And he said, there are 3 secrets to writing a good novel. The trouble is, nobody knows what they are. So, and it's a bit the same with a travel book. You just kind of do, you do what feels right. I think if you set out with a program, it might not work. I mean, I've talked about explaining the Arab Islamic world through following Ibn Battuta, which sounds very grand, but I only kind of realized that afterwards. I just set out to go to places with Ibn Battuta and see what was left of his world.
If I may add something about travel literature, is that it goes across various disciplines, right, and not just rihla, right, because it's a genre in fiqh, jurisprudence, right, Zad al-Musafir. So the rules of prayer, for example, while you're traveling, etc., but also medical works. Ibn Rabban al-Tabari has also Zad al-Musafir, which is a medical really work of the medicine that you need while you're traveling, right? And it's also a literary genre, Hanin ila al-Awtan, of course, genre, but also Zad Safar al-Muluk, for example, of Tha'alibi, which is quotations that how do you greet someone, for example, who's traveling, or it's a literary anthology.
And also the ziyarat, or
Ziyarat
so religious ziyarat.
Yeah, there's the al-Ishara to the Ma'rifat al-Ziyarat. That's a wonderful pilgrim guide, really, with al-Harawi, which is, but it's also a beautiful travel book. And also, in the sort of so-called typical qasida, we do generally have a rahil. There's a travel section in the old odes, or whatever you call them, and some of them are very beautiful. I mean, in my Ibn Khaldun, there are 2 or 3 poems which are written for the Mawlid, for the Prophet's birthday, or to go with things that are being sent to the holy cities in Arabia, and they quite often use the idea of traveling, and very beautiful.
Salma, you had a question, no?
George and then Salma.
When Ibn Khaldun and Ibn Battuta both lived in Cairo, but nearly 300 years earlier, there was a full expedition to China, to Dumiyat. Do you know anything about it? Did anybody write about it? Hakim Amrillah sent all these people to China to have relationships between Cairo and China. Do you have anything written about it?
I don't know, to be honest. That seems a hole. It is a hole in my knowledge. Yeah. So it was al-Hakim Amrillah who sent an expedition.
Yes. So I was wondering
Do you know if anything was recorded?
I don't know. I know the name of the captain, Dumiyat, but I don't know more than that. And I was hoping that he might have written something about it. And that was
You will get
years earlier than what you know. That's why I'm talking about it.
You have got me, my feelers twitching. No, thank you. Well, and of course you get. So he sent them to China, and of course we get expeditions going the other way. There's the famous Zheng He, who was Ming Dynasty, but there were earlier people as well who came the other way.
Salon.
Yeah, no, I'll look into that.
Yeah, what I wanted to say concerning travel literature, I think it's a bit misleading to say that what you wrote about Ibn Battuta was, or it's kind of classified as travel, because what you did really is all the traveling you were doing was almost like field work that we do. For example, as architects or historians, you actually went to investigate. And I think what is not mentioned is how much credibility you gave to Ibn Battuta's work.
Right.
With I mean, it's also demeaning to say it's translation. It's much more than translation, because it's a written work that is following up in terms of the research on Ibn Battuta, and a lot of the credibility that was being given always, unfortunately, in the West, if you like, with the publication of this literature. But at the same time, I, knowing you, know that it also gave a lot of credibility to finding yourself in Yemen and who you were. The other thing I wanted to say that people probably don't know is when you've lived in Yemen for 20 or 30 or 40 years, they don't realize, especially not, unfortunately, not people in this part of the world, don't realize what living in Yemen is, or how much we are still in touch with the land as Arabs, as origins, and the word Arab, not really, but the language itself has a lot to do with it. I mean, even if you read the Tarikh al-Arab Qabla al-Islam, you will find that there are terms in reference to building materials that are still used in the contemporary Yemeni lexicon. You see, that as Arabs, we wouldn't understand these words. We don't use them anymore, not in any dialect, not in any language, except in Yemen.
Yeah.
So you see, even the life there, whether you're living in Sana'a or in Hadramaut, has this time dimension that you don't have anywhere else in the Arab world or elsewhere.
And that's the sort of thing that we have both done in our different ways, as I tried to say.
Contributes. So when Bilal was commenting, or Nadia was commenting on why Ibn Battuta and etc., but there is this affinity that rooted you in that tradition. Yeah,
and I must say, I'm not really joking when I talk about the Sheikh and the Murid. He was questioned a lot. He was questioned in his own time. Ibn Khaldun writes a famous passage about the credibility of Ibn Battuta.
Not just Ibn Khaldun. I mean, he was not a credible, as you say. Ibn Jubair was the one. If you mentioned Ibn Battuta as a reference, if you were doing history or doing research, go to Ibn Jubair. Ibn Battuta was not a credible reference.
But, and I want to give a concrete example where he talks about witnessing a sati ceremony in India, where the widow of a Hindu warrior burns herself on the funeral pyre of her late husband. And he saw this, and it obviously affected him. Well, who wouldn't be affected by horror? And it sort of seared it into his brain. And he describes the scene very vividly. And I went to great lengths to find the spot, and it's still there. And it's still, he says there was a tank of water between 4 small temples, and it was overhung with trees so densely entangled that the sun hardly penetrated. And the same trees are there. I mean, wallah, they are the same trees. They're much older than Ibn Battuta. And you could follow him down the way they went down the path to the very spot where the funeral pyre was. And I'm not kidding, there was a stone there that was still blackened by fire. Now, I'm not claiming it was from a fire from 650 years ago, but that was the very case. And you know, what he didn't do, or what he didn't see, but I saw, was an enclosure of, I think they're called satistal, and they're little temples to these women who have become absorbed in the deity. And at least one of them was contemporary with his time. And I like to think it was to the woman that he saw killing herself. You know, and then another one. He remembers the inscription in the great mosque in Male, in the capital of the Maldives. 15 years later, he remembers it with no notes, and you can go. It's still there. You can go and read it, and he gets it absolutely right, except for a non-Arabic name that he gets a bit wrong.
He's usually accused of fabricating his trip to China. Right? That's the usual accusation in Western academia.
Yes, and I don't doubt that he went to the coast. Whether he went to Khan Balak or Beijing, there are questions about that. Being a fan of his, I would always accuse Ibn Juzay of adding these bits on.
Questions?
Yes, yes.
I have a question. Do you have any travel who ever went to Japan?
To Japan?
To Japan?
Japan. I know there's a traveler who says that
Riyad al-Waqwaq?
after the sea or across the sea there is the land of the
Al-Waqwaq?
Al-Waqwaq.
Al-Waqwaq.
I don't know who's the specific traveler is, but I've been always wondering, were there any relation between the Islamic world and Japan anytime point before the Ottoman, the late Ottoman?
Yeah, not that I know of. There was a knowledge of, probably the nearest might be Korea, and there was a knowledge of Korea. And the reason I know about this is because one of my books came out in Korean, and they asked me to write an introduction. So I thought, I'll do something on Arabic geographical knowledge of Korea. And yes, that was known. I think they called it a Sila, Bilad Sila, after the name of a dynasty. And it was home to these white hawks or something, and that's about all. Further than that, it gets really misty. As you said, Bilal, there's this land of Waq. But, don't forget that at that time, Africa was thought to bend round. So it kind of almost met up with the far east of Asia. So Waq is sometimes off Africa and sometimes off Asia. It's Africa only kind of straightened out with Magellan, I suppose.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this was Tim Mackintosh-Smith, and we're very proud to have him at AUB. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fascinating.
Yeah, well, thank you.